Okay, let's just dive right into this. You know that feeling when your mind is just constantly restless? Like you're endlessly scrolling, totally distracted by all the dazzling, endless noise of modern society, and you never really stop to ask yourself, wait, what am I actually doing all this for? Well, today's explainer is going to take us on a pretty fascinating journey into a text that asks exactly that. We are going to unpack the highly unique philosophical teachings and writings of the guide Feng, the founder of Lifechanyuan. And we're going to map out his incredibly specific, highly detailed cosmological worldview.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with an introduction to Lifechanyuan, move on to the virtue of questioning, explore the building block metaphor, discuss the joy of creation, and finally wrap up with sheep, deer, and purification. Let's get started.
All right, Section 1, Introduction to Lifechanyuan. First off, we need to look at what Feng calls modern distractions.
So Feng views the modern world as, frankly, mesmerizing but totally distracting. He argues that humanity is just caught up in the tides of society, practically hypnotized by TV shows and ads, actively avoiding any kind of deeper reflection. And his followers draw a really sharp contrast here. Think about a viral pop culture sensation from the time, like Muzi May's Sex Diary. It skyrockets to instant fame, but then cools off just as fast. Lifechanyuan, on the other hand, it's described as a gem sitting at the very top of a high mountain. It absolutely isn't meant for instant gratification. It requires time, real discovery, and what the text beautifully calls the labor of the soul.
This whole idea of slow, deliberate growth is perfectly captured in a quote from one of Feng's followers, the Xianhe Celestial. They wrote, "Lifechanyuan is like yeast. It cannot leaven the whole dough all at once, but it works slowly and steadily until the entire dough rises." So the big takeaway here is that the movement views its own influence as this gradual, joyful fermentation process. It's the complete opposite of those fleeting, flash-in-the-pan trends of modern media.
Moving on to Section 2, the virtue of questioning. And it really all boils down to asking, why? Why?
Imagine actually applying that to your own daily scrolling habit. According to Feng's teachings, having a lazy mind that just accepts ready-made answers is fundamentally flawed. He writes that the absolute foundational virtue of a Lifechanyuan celestial is to constantly, relentlessly ask, why? For every single teaching you hear, every phenomenon you see, and every shadow of doubt you feel, followers are instructed to actively question it.
And this really illustrates the core virtues outlined in his text. A celestial has to seek the ultimate truth and trace every concept all the way back to its roots. They're told to never, ever settle until the truth is fully revealed. But perhaps most importantly, Feng heavily criticizes blind faith. The text explicitly demands that followers refuse to just blindly follow religions or political ideologies simply because, everyone else is doing it. Okay, Section 3, the building block metaphor. This is where we get into the actual creation of humanity. So Feng's cosmology takes a surprisingly analytical approach to the book of Genesis. Take a look at this biblical quote. "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." The text focuses intensely on that plural word, us. Feng argues that, hey, if the greatest creator had made humans entirely alone, that pronoun would be singular. Because it says us, he posits that creation was actually a collaborative effort by a second group of angels. It wasn't a solo act by the creator at all. So how did this massive collaboration actually work? Well, Feng uses a really interesting building block analogy. First, the greatest creator doesn't hand over some precise step-by-step blueprint. He just provides a vague concept and the basic blocks. Next, the angels have to collaborate and kind of just figure it out on their own. It's described as being like a child awkwardly trying to build a house from a vague idea in their head. And finally, because there was no strict blueprint, the resulting humans varied greatly depending on the angels' own lack of experience. According to the text, this messy process even explains the quote-unquote accidental creation of apes. Oops!
To further explain why human quality varies so wildly despite us all originating from the exact same set of parts, Feng actually draws on his own real-world background as a mechanical worker. Think about a group of mechanics. If you hand the exact same diagram and parts to mechanics from Germany, Japan, China, and Tanzania, the final machines they build are going to perform very differently based on their individual craftsmanship and their personal sense of responsibility. In Feng's theology, the angels were exactly like these mechanics. They just possessed varying levels of skill.
Which brings us to Section 4, the joy of creation. A naturally questioning celestial would probably stop here and ask, well, why delegate at all?
right? If the angels were inevitably going to make mistakes, why wouldn't the greatest creator just make humans perfectly, directly, himself? Shufeng answers this super high theology question by grounding it in a very relatable real-world anecdote. He cites a story that was actually broadcast on CCTV about a woman named Nubi. She was an Armenian nurse who left a very wealthy family to marry a poor farmer in China. But instead of complaining about his impoverished home, she found profound, genuine happiness in building a warm life with him completely from scratch.
Shufeng uses Nubi's story to highlight a really core philosophical point for Lifechanyuan. True joy comes from the act of creation itself, not from just inheriting something that's already finished. Think about the joy of putting together building blocks yourself. Now, compare that to the incredibly hollow feeling of a father who just hands his kid a model house that has already been completely superglued together. Zero fun, right? Shufeng asserts that the greatest creator delegated creation simply to share this profound joy of creating with the angels. In this view, the creator isn't some cold sculptor, but a being who deeply values the joyful, messy process.
All right, Section 5, Sheep, Deer, and Purification. Let's explore what the text calls the cosmic chaos. This is where we get into a quite complex and definitely controversial allegory. Shufeng's writings describe two primary groups on Earth. First, we have the sheep, which represents the Creator's planned flock, guided spiritually by Jesus the Shepherd. Then we have the deer. The text categorizes the yellow race as an unplanned offshoot, comparing it to a son secretly sneaking some deer onto his father's sheep pasture. So to guide this unplanned group, the Creator assigned Buddha Shakyamuni.
Now, because the deer were essentially unauthorized to be grazing in this earthly pasture to begin with, Shufeng explains that Buddha was given a very specific, stringent curriculum for them. Buddha's teachings explicitly instructed them not to marry or reproduce, and absolutely not to cling to the mortal world. Instead, their entire goal was to cultivate themselves, attain enlightenment, and quickly return to their celestial homeland.
But here is the ultimate problem presented in Shufeng's writings. Over time, a massive cosmic chaos has unfolded. The sheep no longer listen to the shepherd, and the deer no longer heed the Buddha. Basically, humanity has completely ignored its assigned spiritual guides, and as a result, the world has fallen into deep, intractable disorder. The whole system is broken.
And that leads us to the grand culmination of Shufeng's text. He argues that things have gotten so bad, the only possible solution left is a forced purification, a process of returning, in his own words, cows to cowsheds and pigs to pigsties. To execute this massive reset, the text claims a figure called the Handun baby was sent, essentially birthing the Lifechanyuan movement itself. So I'll leave you with this provocative question to ponder. In a world they view as completely disordered and chaotic, how exactly does this movement plan to enact this grand purification? It's a truly fascinating glimpse into a highly structured, intricate worldview that leaves you wanting to explore the psychology of such movements even further. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning.